Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Sniper Ghost Warrior for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This is a first-person shooter by City Interactive that was first released for PC and Xbox 360 in June of 2010, followed by the PlayStation release in the following year. And people didn't generally talk about this one all that much. In fact, I never really heard all that much about this game until long after the fact. And the only reason I really have it is because I picked it up in a bundle deal. It wasn't really something I noticed on Steam all that much. I did hear some rumblings about the sequel, but I never really heard all that much about the original game. So I looked it up, and it got pretty mixed to negative reviews. And so I questioned, well, why did they get that sort of reception? I mean, this is a modern military shooter, sure, but it's got a very interesting concept. You play as a sniper. That's not all that common. It's particularly when the actual emphasis in the game seems to be on the stealthy sniping element, and it has a much more fleshed out version of that than many other modern military shooters on the market. So, I guess the question here is, did it go wrong? And if so, where did it go wrong? Well, the first thing you notice that goes wrong is the presentation. And it's for a variety of reasons. For one, it uses the Chrome engine, which in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. The Chrome engine does have some good things going for it. It has some pretty big draw distances, and the amount of detail in the environment is often rather solid. Although their textures tend to be very, very muddy, and the colors are really washed out for the most part, so it doesn't look very pleasant at all. It's definitely going for that brown and gray and realistic look, which is incredibly tiresome. We see it way too much these days, and frankly, I feel like they should get a hint by now. But no, they didn't get a hint. Of course, you gotta keep in mind, this is the same engine that powered Call of Juarez Bound in Blood, so the whole washed out colors thing isn't really all that surprising, it's just disappointing. The modeling is generally okay. There's some weirdness going on with animations. I don't know whether that's the engine's fault, because there were some weird things here and there with the animations in the Call of Juarez games as well. In fact, this game's animations look a lot more like the original Call of Juarez's animations rather than Bound in Blood's. Granted, they're not developed by the same people, so I don't know whether it was just the people at City Interactive didn't entirely know what they were doing with the animations, but a lot of them look very sluggish and awkward and just very unpleasant in general, and very unrealistic for the most part. And then, of course, there's the issue of everything looking kind of plasticky. If you look at the characters in particular, they really look plasticky. It's just the way that the shaders are on their faces and everything, and the way that the textures are all muddy and washed out, and often very pixelated. So there were trade-offs made, and they're not really good trade-offs. But all of this wouldn't be as big of a deal if the game wasn't completely riddled with graphical glitches. All over the place. Things will flicker in and out. Things constantly pop in or pop out. There's all sorts of weird things going on when you get into watery areas, or when, for instance, you die in the game. It just starts looking like they had a sudden Windows crash or something. It doesn't actually crash it. It's just it looks like that with the whole repeating images thing. And it looks horrible. And you'll constantly notice things in the graphics that just are really off, like certain buildings are floating, and it just looks ridiculous. Really just kills your immersion when you're in there. Granted, there's not all that much immersion to begin with, because the rest of the presentation isn't all that great either. You have meh voice acting, which admittedly does its job, but that's about it. Although it did get really tiresome hearing the same, basically 3 conversations between all of the guards. They're speaking Spanish, by the way. And hearing the same, basically 3 conversations over and over and over again got incredibly tiresome. The actual main cast has a lot more to say, obviously, but they give very uninspired performances that really aren't that impressive at all. Then there's the music, which is fairly generic modern military shooter music. I guess it works, but it's not at all impressive, and in fact it's kind of exhausting to some degree. So overall, the presentation leaves a lot to be desired, and is actually a fairly sizable detriment to the game half the time, particularly when you can't tell where enemies are because you've got such a low FOV in this game. Yes, a low FOV, that's another problem as well. And the environment itself often obscures your vision. It's pretty infuriating sometimes. But obviously I can put up with bugs, glitches, and poor presentation in general so long as the story and the gameplay are up to snuff. Well, let's talk about the story first. You play as a variety of characters throughout this game, but you can basically say that the main character is the Sergeant Tyler Razor 64 Wells, who is the sniper that you play as in this game. You also play as a variety of other characters who, without spoiling all that much, aren't really snipers. And you can already see where that might be a problem when we get to the gameplay, but we'll get to that. The basic story revolves around you and these various characters in their involvement in attempting to take out a general who staged a coup in a fictional Latin American country. And that's kind of it, really. There's not much in the way of storyline to this game, actually. It's pretty standard military FPS fare with some slight espionage stuff going on. It's really not interesting. And in fact, it's rather tiresome. You don't give a crap about any of the characters because they're all pretty much blank slates who are occasionally throwing around some slight semblance of personality, but mostly are very, very flat and lifeless. They're almost cardboard cutouts of military stereotypes. It's kind of annoying, actually. But the plot doesn't really go anywhere, and it's certainly not going to keep you involved for very long. So it really falls down to the gameplay, which is fairly interesting, at least in concept. When you're playing as the sniper in particular, it's pretty interesting. You're playing as the meat of the game. And the sniper does a lot of sneaking around, as you would expect him to do. You eliminate targets at a long range, you have to deal with windage, you have to deal with your heart rate, and usually that just means you have to wait for a moment before your heart rate kind of stabilizes and you're getting those breaths in, and that stabilizes your scope. And so you do see that there is a bit more depth to the sniping than most other games on the market. Although it really does come across as something along the lines of Sniper Elite V2. Only not quite done as interestingly. They even have the bullet cam. The only difference is they don't have X-ray to it, so you don't get to see the gruesome detail of the bullets smashing through the enemy's skull and bursting his eye out of his socket and everything like that. You just hit them in the face and they just kind of flip over like a ragdoll, like they always do in video games. So it's considerably less satisfying than something like Sniper Elite V2 or Sniper Elite 3, where they have that ridiculous X-ray cam thing going on. But that said, the sniping itself is actually fairly interesting. Up until you find out that the AI is problematic. You see, you can sometimes snipe the enemy at near point blank and they still won't notice you. Other times, you cannot fire a single shot and be hidden in the brush, and they'll still spot you and open fire on your position. Oh, and they're really good shots, by the way. I wasn't even playing on hard. I was playing on medium. Just normal difficulty. And they would constantly just annihilate me because they were such good shots when they actually started shooting at me. And so you find that although the AI is often really easy to trick because it just is completely stupid, at other times they have this magical ability to spot you through walls and through foliage and when you're not moving in the foliage and all that sort of thing. By the way, you're wearing a ghillie suit, by the way. You shouldn't be easy to spot in the brush and everything, but such is the AI. And even worse, they can shoot through things like the foliage without any difficulty whatsoever, while you can't even see them through the foliage. So you run into problems with that. How do you remedy this? Well, there is the spotting system. You can hold the scope or the crosshair or whatever over your various targets for a short period of time, and eventually they'll start having this red outline. And then they'll show up on your minimap, and so you can use that to your advantage, but it does take a bit to do that. Although it doesn't really help you because, again, the AI ranges from ridiculously stupid to suddenly god tier. At least in terms of, oh, I spotted you through 3 walls and now I have instantly gunned you down. Because reasons. And that's when you're using things like the suppressed rifle, the suppressed pistol, or throwing knives, which are instant and silent kills and things like that. Also, as the sniper, you have the problem of occasionally having to use a rope, which is just as fiddly as it was in the original Call of Juarez, which means that it's very problematic and you sit there and wonder why it's not working until you realize that you have to do very, very specific movement where you have to look directly up at wherever the rope landed, and then you use W or S on PC to climb up or down the rope. It's ridiculous. And then there's the other problems when you actually get into firefights. Now you see, as a sniper, that's not actually that big of a deal because the sniper rifle's basically an instant kill no matter which one you're using. In fact, they all function almost exactly the same, except for the SR-25 being suppressed. So that counts as silent kills, whereas the other ones are not suppressed, and so they function exactly the same, actually. You have an AS-50, you've got a Dragunov, you've got a MSG-90, and they all function exactly the same. Which is weird because an AS-50 in particular should be perhaps longer range or things like that, because, you know, it's a 50 caliber. But that's beside the point. You have a 2-weapon limit, of course, and in this case you carry a suppressed pistol and your primary weapon, which if you're a sniper, you're always going to be carrying a sniper rifle. At least one would hope, because there's no reason to not carry one. Even in close quarters, the sniper rifle is actually really, really good. Now, if you're playing as another character, you're going to be stuck with something else. Most likely an assault rifle or a shotgun. And then you're in for a treat, because those things handle just incredibly poorly. As in, you fire 2 shots and suddenly you're aiming at the sky. They completely over-exaggerated the recoil to the point where it's practically impossible to actually control your fire when you're actually using the assault rifles in particular. Your rounds just spray all over the place. You're never actually going to hit anything unless you take the time to do single shots. And obviously you can't switch weapon modes over to, say, instead of being full auto to semi-auto. No. It's only fully automatic, so you just spray and pray, and good luck, because it can take upwards of 3 hits, maybe 4 or 5, before you finally bring an enemy down. And it's not even like they're heavily armored or anything like that. It's not like there's special enemies that just take more damage. No, they all are pretty much the same, and they take a lot of hits, whereas as the sniper, it's 1 shot, 1 kill. Meanwhile, they're sitting there and they can pull off basically, oh look, I took you down from 100% health to 20 health with 3 shots. that all hit you instantly, and you couldn't possibly react to it. Yay! You can also throw grenades if you want. It doesn't really help all that much. I never really got the arc down on them. They seemed very odd in that regard. And even then, the blast radius doesn't seem that big anyway. And so, what you have here, with regards to the non-sniper combat, is pretty generic modern military shooter crap. Only it's worse than pretty much any modern military shooter I've ever played. Except for Rogue Warrior, because Rogue Warrior. But it is just profoundly unsatisfying to run around on the ground with, you know, an AK or an M4 or whatever. And so you find that those sections of the game are infuriating. Now, as both basic ideas here, you can actually use medkits, and those are just syringes, and you just use those. You can find resupplies of them in the world. The problem is, you don't regenerate health past 30 hit points, so you're pretty much screwed if you get down to that point and you don't have any other medkits available. So what you find is the game is actually very unfairly difficult. And keep in mind, I only played this thing on the medium difficulty. I don't even want to know what it's like on hard. Because you have this horrible inconsistency with the AI. You have very linear level design with a lot of ridiculous situations resulting from it, where enemies can see you through walls, it seems, or there might just be a gap in the wall that you couldn't possibly see, and guess what, they're there. The stealth sections, where it's mandatory stealth, I might add, which is infuriating in any game, not just this one, but those sections where you have to literally sneak through without alerting anybody, otherwise the mission's failed and you have to start from the last checkpoint. Those are the worst because of that whole AI problem. That said, the checkpoint system is also to blame for some issues. It's not a very good checkpoint system. It's better than others I've seen, but it has a tendency to start you back and have to go through a long segment of infuriation once more. And so, what you have here in general is an FPS that doesn't really seem to know what it's trying to do. On the one hand, it is titled Sniper Ghost Warrior, and it has a more fleshed out sniper component than most games in this particular genre. But even then, it feels kind of like a cheap knockoff, and that sniper gameplay really doesn't last you very long when, for example, you're standing there atop of a lighthouse and having to pick off enemies from a very long distance away, and they're able to hit you with pinpoint accuracy from ranges that basically you'd have to get incredibly lucky to hit with an assault rifle. And yet here they are, regularly hitting you for massive damage. It's ridiculous. The game's just horribly unbalanced. The level design is very linear, even though it acts like it isn't linear. It's got a lot of situations where you just sit there and have to learn things by trial and error. Because you couldn't know that that person was there, and suddenly they pop up there, and now you're screwed. Things like that. It's a very uninspired game. It's a very short game. Mercifully short, at least. But it's an unfairly difficult one, to the point where it's just infuriating to play. There's basically no fun to be had here, of any sort. And this goes beyond just being just another modern military shooter. It's an especially bad one. Now, they did make a sequel, and I really hope that the sequel is better, because this thing is plagued by all sorts of problems, particularly with the AI, with the bugs and glitches and that sort of thing. And all of that blends together to just make it a terrible experience. I give it a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching.